Imagine standing still for a portrait beside your father and brothers, only to find days later that a stranger, a boy no one remembers, is standing among you in the photograph. The year is 1891, a cold October afternoon in Victorian England. The Ashworth men, a proud patriarch and his sons, gather in their drawing room for what should have been a routine family portrait. But when the plate develops, the photographer's heart skips a beat. Behind the youngest boy stands another child, pale, translucent, and unmistakably there. No one present had seen him. No one alive could have. What began as a simple portrait became one of the most unsettling mysteries ever recorded, a case that would pull scientists, skeptics, and scholars into a chilling question that still echoes through history. Can a camera capture what the human eye cannot? If mysteries like this captivate you, stories where logic trembles and the impossible seems almost real, then make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who seek the unexplained. Now, let's step back into 1891 and witness the photograph that forever blurred the line between the living and the dead. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, dust motes dancing in silence. Three brothers stood shoulder to shoulder, their father behind them, each man frozen in place as the camera's lens gleamed. The photographer, a stoic man named Harrison, adjusted the tripod with careful precision. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the eerie stillness that seemed to settle over the entire room. "Hold your breath," he murmured, voice echoing through the drawing room. The air grew thick. Every clock seemed to stop ticking. The exposure would last half a minute, long enough for unease to form. The eldest son, Thomas, clenched his jaw. The youngest, Daniel, tried not to blink. Their father's steady presence anchored them, his shadow long across the patterned carpet. When the shutter finally closed, it released a whisper, like air escaping a sealed tomb. Harrison nodded once, signaling the end of the pose. "That's done," he said quietly. He carried the glass plate upstairs, where his temporary darkroom waited. The attic smelled of ether and collodion, sharp, chemical, alive. He'd done this hundreds of times, yet tonight something felt different. He prepared the solution, dipped the plate, and waited. Shapes began to form. First faint outlines, then solid figures. The Ashworth men, crisp and clear, emerged like ghosts from light. But there was one too many. A faint silhouette stood behind Daniel, the youngest. Not part of the background, not a shadow, but a child. A boy no one remembered seeing. Harrison frowned, leaning closer to the dim red glow. The figure's features sharpened as the chemicals worked their magic. Pale face, faint eyes, an expression of quiet observation. It wasn't a double exposure. The edges were too defined, the lighting too precise. Harrison's heartbeat grew louder than the creak of the floor beneath his boots. He checked his lens, his plate, his chemicals, all flawless. Still, the phantom boy stared back from the image, as if daring him to find an explanation. By morning, Harrison stood in the Ashworth study, photograph trembling in his hand. The father leaned in, eyes narrowing as the ghostly shape appeared behind his youngest son. "Who is that?" Thomas whispered. The room went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Daniel only stared, calm, almost unsurprised. "That's Arthur," he said finally, his voice small but certain. "He was standing next to me." The words dropped like stones in water. None of them had seen another child. The house had been locked, every door watched. Yet Daniel spoke as if it were ordinary truth. The father pressed his hand to the desk, his knuckles white. "Arthur who?" Daniel shrugged. "He didn't say." That night, sleep refused to come. The brothers whispered through the darkness. The image burned into their minds. Even the faintest creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Downstairs, the father sat alone by the dying fire, the photograph resting against a candle holder. The boy's face caught the flicker, pale and half-lit like it might move at any moment. When morning arrived, Harrison returned with renewed determination. He proposed a second sitting. Same room, same arrangement. He wanted proof, not stories. The father agreed reluctantly. The camera stood again in the drawing room. Dust floated through the pale morning light. Every man took his place, faces solemn, eyes fixed forward. 30 seconds of silence, 30 seconds of stillness that stretched into eternity. When the photograph developed, Harrison felt his stomach drop. The boy was there again, clearer, closer. The apparition now stood with a hand on Daniel's shoulder. The image looked impossibly real. The faint impression of fingers pressing through cloth, the same ghostly gaze turned toward the camera. Harrison's assistant, James, who had come to witness the session, stepped back. "That's not a trick," he whispered. "It can't be." Harrison wanted to deny it, to rationalize every inch of the anomaly. But logic faltered beneath the weight of that translucent stare. Word spread quickly. Scholars, journalists, and curious onlookers arrived, each demanding to see the impossible image. The Ashworth father allowed only a few to view it, fearing mockery or worse, obsession. Daniel, meanwhile, spoke to the air. He laughed in empty rooms, played games no one else could join. His brothers watched with growing dread. When asked, he always gave the same calm answer. "Arthur's here." Harrison began to research the land's history. Parish records, census lists, forgotten ledgers. The truth he uncovered chilled him to the core. Decades earlier, the estate had been a boarding school, a place for young boys. Closed abruptly after an epidemic took several lives, among them a 7-year-old named Arthur Peyton. The name hit Harrison like a hammer. The age matched. The face matched. Everything did. He carried the photograph to the father once more. "It's him," Harrison said softly. "A child buried on this very ground nearly 30 years ago." The father stared at the glass plate, speechless. For the first time, doubt and belief collided within him like two storms. That night, footsteps echoed through the halls, light, rapid, playful. Daniel's laughter followed. When the father entered his son's room, he found it empty. Only a chill lingered. Moments later, Daniel appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed. "He says he misses his brothers," the boy whispered. "He says he doesn't like being forgotten." No one spoke. No one could. From that moment forward, the house changed. Doors opened on their own. The piano downstairs struck random notes in the quiet hours of dawn. Harrison returned weekly, documenting every event. Each visit left him more unsettled. The photographs multiplied, each one clearer than the last. Arthur's presence grew stronger, his outline sharper, his eyes almost lifelike. The investigators would soon arrive, bringing instruments and theories. But on that first night, when science still had no voice, it was only men and a mystery far greater than themselves. And somewhere, beyond glass and silver, the unseen boy waited. Silent, watchful, immortalized in a moment that should never have existed. Harrison could no longer sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, that faint, translucent face hovered behind his lids. He had captured something that should not exist, yet undeniably did. He returned to the mansion with equipment packed neatly in leather cases. The father greeted him in silence. The brothers waited nearby, uneasy, watching their youngest brother move through the house like half a shadow. Daniel no longer played alone. He spoke aloud to someone unseen. His laughter, once warm, now echoed strangely, bouncing from corners that swallowed sound instead of returning it. Harrison began to question reality. He photographed empty rooms, empty chairs, the staircase, the hall, each time hoping the camera would lie, but the glass plates told the same truth. Arthur was always there, sometimes behind Daniel, sometimes beside him. always faint, always watching, each appearance sharper, as if the boundary between his world and theirs was thinning. The father read through parish archives late into the night, ink smudged across his fingers, candlelight flickering as he traced the name again. Arthur Peyton, 7 years old, buried near the edge of the old property. He closed the record book with trembling hands. For a long while, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like old wood. "He died here," he whispered, "right where we stand." Harrison stared at the boy's ghostly likeness, now locked under glass. "Then he never left," he said quietly, the words chilling the air between them. They decided to visit the grave. Morning fog rolled thick across the field, the ground damp beneath their boots. A small headstone leaned crooked against time, the name nearly erased by weather. Daniel knelt beside it, tracing the faint letters. "He says this is where he fell asleep," he murmured, eyes glassy, unfocused. The father's breath caught in his chest. No one else heard a thing, only Daniel's quiet voice, answering something invisible. His tone softened, as though he were comforting a friend. Harrison took another photograph, framing Daniel and the stone. When the image developed, the figure appeared again, this time standing beside the grave, head bowed, almost peaceful. It was no longer terrifying. It was heartbreakingly human. That night, the wind howled through the chimney like a living thing. Daniel sat by the window, whispering to the dark. His brothers pretended to sleep, too afraid to intervene. "Arthur says he remembers the cold," Daniel whispered. "He says the snow came before the end." His voice broke slightly, emotion piercing through the stillness. Harrison returned the following week with a colleague, Dr. Myers, a researcher curious but skeptical. "If this is genuine," Myers said, setting up instruments, "then we stand before a door science has never opened." They sealed plates, documented procedures, recorded every detail, 5 exposures, 5 moments of truth waiting to unfold. The results stunned even the skeptic. Arthur appeared in 4 of them. Each time his placement changed, sometimes behind Daniel, sometimes beside the father, sometimes just beyond the threshold of the frame, watching. Temperature readings fell sharply whenever Daniel entered the room. Instruments clicked, needles trembled. Myers scribbled notes with shaking hands. "We are not alone," he muttered. "Not here." As the investigation deepened, Daniel began describing memories that weren't his own. Stories of classrooms, old wooden desks, boys reciting Latin verses. Facts later confirmed in forgotten school records. Harrison's rational mind rebelled, but every word the child spoke aligned with the documented past. Arthur's life was bleeding through Daniel's. Myers gathered the men in the study that evening. "Gentlemen," he began, "what we are witnessing may be more than haunting. It may be consciousness preserved, memory without flesh." No one responded. The words felt both profound and terrible. That night, objects moved on their own. Books slid from shelves. A lamp flickered without wind, and from the piano came a faint, deliberate chord. The same note repeated softly 3 times. Daniel smiled faintly. "Arthur likes that sound," he said, as though commenting on the weather. Myers observed him carefully. "Does Arthur speak to you now?" Daniel nodded. "He says you're afraid." The room turned cold. Harrison's breath fogged in the air. The father stepped forward, jaw tight. "Ask him what he wants." Daniel's eyes went distant. When he spoke, his tone no longer belonged to a child. "He wants to be seen," he said. "He wants to remember what it's like to be real." Silence stretched like a rope pulled too tight. Myers decided to continue the experiment the next day. He installed new instruments, scales, thermometers, even a crude recording device. Each time Daniel entered, anomalies multiplied. The weight scale fluctuated without reason. The air shimmered faintly near Daniel's shoulder. Harrison captured frame after frame, unable to stop. The figure grew stronger, more defined. Arthur was no longer a blur. He had texture, hair, clothing, even faint eyes that reflected light. It was as if the camera remembered him better than the living did. When Myers analyzed the data, he found no errors, no trickery. Every measurable variable is consistent, he admitted. And yet the impossible stands before us. Daniel slept restlessly that night. He mumbled names, none of them known. The father sat beside him, unable to rest. In the dim glow of the candle, the boy's breath misted in the air, though the room was warm. "Arthur says he's tired," Daniel whispered in his sleep. "He wants to go home." Morning brought heavy stillness. The photographs from the final session revealed something new. Arthur's figure turning slightly away, fading at the edges, as though retreating. Myers studied it for hours. "Perhaps we've fulfilled his wish," he said softly. "Perhaps the act of remembrance set him free." The father placed the photograph back in its frame, hands trembling. Daniel slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Harrison packed his equipment in silence. The house, though quiet, seemed lighter, the air easier to breathe. But as he closed the door behind him, he glanced once more at the photograph, and for just a heartbeat, the faintest reflection of a boy smiled back. Arthur Peyton, the boy who refused to be forgotten, had finally left his mark, not just on glass and silver, but on every man who dared to look beyond what eyes could see. Weeks passed before Myers returned, this time accompanied by 2 additional researchers, Hodgson and Gurney, men known for dismantling frauds and exposing illusionists. They came not to believe, but to measure. They unpacked brass instruments, notebooks, and a small magnetometer that ticked faintly like a nervous heartbeat. Their intention was simple. If something unseen walked these halls, it would leave a trace. Harrison guided them to the drawing room. Every window was sealed, every curtain pinned. "Same light, same placement," he explained. "If the figure returns, it won't be by accident." Daniel entered quietly, pale but calm. His father's hand rested on his shoulder. The men prepared the plates, each one numbered, sealed, and signed. No room for doubt. Exposure began. 30 seconds of breathless silence. The magnetometer needle twitched violently halfway through, then steadied again. When the shutter clicked shut, everyone exhaled at once. In the dark room, Harrison and Hodgson hovered over the basin. Slowly, faces emerged. Then, unmistakably, the faint form of Arthur again, sharper than before, eyes half-turned toward Daniel. No trickery was possible. Hodgson had mixed the chemicals himself. Gurney had handled the plates. Their reputations depended on skepticism, yet disbelief faltered beneath the undeniable image. They repeated the experiment 4 more times. Arthur appeared in 3. Each manifestation carried small changes. A tilt of the head, a shift of distance, as though responding to unseen conversation. During the final exposure, Daniel whispered softly, "He says he feels warm again." The words froze everyone. Myers scribbled furiously, documenting tone, time, temperature, every fluctuation. Later, the readings showed drops of 3 degrees at each manifestation point. Harrison marked them on the blueprint of the room, small circles forming a pattern around Daniel's position. Myers studied the map. "It's as though the boy is the anchor," he murmured. "Whatever crosses over does so through him." The conclusion chilled him more than any ghost story could. That night, they set up continuous instruments, thermometers, scales, even a primitive electrical coil to test for field disturbances. Each man took shifts, recording every creak and whisper of the mansion. At 2 a.m., the coil flickered. A faint hum resonated through the walls. Daniel stirred in his sleep upstairs. The temperature in his room plunged. Frost spread across the window pane. Myers raced up the stairs. He found Daniel standing beside the window, eyes closed, lips moving silently. When he spoke, his voice sounded distant. "He says the light hurts." Moments later, the coil in the study shorted out completely. The instrument spiked, then died. Silence reclaimed the house. The boy collapsed, unharmed but drained, as though something had passed through him. At dawn, they developed the automatic camera's plates. Every frame was empty except the last. In it, Arthur stood full length beside Daniel's bed, hand outstretched, expression serene. Myers stared at the image. "We're witnessing an interaction between energy and memory," he said quietly. "Not haunting. Communication." Harrison said nothing. He only looked at the boy and saw exhaustion beyond his years. They decided to rest, but rest proved impossible. The house pulsed with subtle movement. Boards creaking where no weight pressed, faint knocks answering spoken words. Gurney noted rhythmic patterns to the sounds, like code. Perhaps intention, he mused, or mimicry. Whatever it was, it made sleep a stranger. By the second night, Daniel had regained strength. He asked Harrison to take one more photograph, saying Arthur wished for it. Reluctantly, the men agreed, curiosity outweighing fear. When the image appeared, Arthur's face seemed peaceful, almost grateful. For the first time, his outline glowed faintly around the edges, as though illuminated from within. Myers interpreted it as completion, a transfer finished. "He wanted acknowledgement," he said. "Now he's had it." The father clasped Daniel tightly, silent gratitude heavy in his grip. Outside, dawn painted the fields in pale gold. For the first morning in weeks, the mansion felt alive in an ordinary way, creaking with sunlight instead of shadows. Yet Harrison knew something lingered. Not menace, but memory. The instruments recorded no further anomalies, but the sensation of being observed never entirely faded. When the researchers departed, they left behind crates of notes, glass plates carefully sealed, and a single undeniable conclusion. The impossible had been measured, and it left fingerprints science could not erase. Harrison locked the photographs away, unsure whether to publish or protect them. Myers promised restraint, though fascination gleamed in his eyes. "We've seen proof of persistence," he said. "That changes everything." In the weeks that followed, no more disturbances occurred. Daniel returned to laughter and books, his brothers to work. Only the father kept the final image framed above the mantel. Sometimes, late at night, he swore he could see a faint shimmer reflected in the glass, just enough to remind him that wonder and fear were often the same thing. And deep in the attic, beneath covered equipment, the last plate rested, a silent record of the moment science touched the edge of eternity and found a boy waiting in the light. Months rolled quietly across the estate. Morning sun replaced candlelight, laughter replaced whispers. For the first time in memory, the Ashworth men lived without the chill of unseen eyes behind them. Yet Harrison could not let it rest. He spent his evenings poring over every glass plate, every exposure mark, every measurement recorded by Myers. The mystery demanded understanding more than peace. In London, rumors spread through scientific circles. Some called him visionary, others fool. No one denied the clarity of his images or the precision of the logged data that proved nothing and everything simultaneously. Harrison began lecturing privately to small gatherings of scholars. He spoke calmly, showing the photographs only briefly, enough to leave the room silent. "Gentlemen," he would say, "light remembers what we refuse to see." Myers published cautious papers describing energy fluctuations, not ghosts. He framed the findings as anomalies of perception. Yet between lines his awe leaked through. He had measured the unmeasurable. Daniel grew older, taller, his childhood memories blurring like mist. He rarely mentioned Arthur. When pressed, he simply said, "He was my friend when I needed one." That was all. The father kept the final framed image locked in his study. Visitors rarely noticed it until nightfall, when the firelight caught the glass and revealed a pale figure watching gently from behind the boy. Years later, Harrison revisited the site with new equipment and younger colleagues. They found no anomalies, no fluctuations, only quiet fields and an aging house content to remain ordinary. Still, as evening settled, one of the assistants swore he saw a boy in the distance, waving once before fading into the tall grass. Harrison said nothing. He simply smiled sadly. Back in the city, he cataloged every report of inexplicable photography he could find, 12 verified cases spanning 3 decades. Each involved children, each revealed figures tethered to forgotten places. He proposed a theory he never published, that innocence carried frequencies of memory adult reason could not register, and that cameras, mechanical witnesses, sometimes caught echoes of that resonance. Myers encouraged restraint. "The world isn't ready," he warned. "They'll crucify the idea before they test it." Harrison nodded, though his notebooks told another story, a conviction that truth mattered more than acceptance. Over time, curiosity replaced fear. Other investigators repeated the experiments with varying success. Some captured blurs, others nothing at all. None matched the clarity of Arthur standing beside Daniel. The father aged quietly, his sons grown into steady men. He rarely spoke of that autumn, yet his journals betrayed fascination rather than dread. He wrote, "Perhaps reality has more corners than we imagine." One winter, Harrison received a letter sealed with the crest of the Royal Society. They invited him to demonstrate his findings under supervision. He declined politely, preferring mystery to mockery. Instead, he wrote a book, privately printed, limited to a few copies, titled Light Between Worlds. It chronicled the Ashworth sessions, the instruments, and the haunting humanity of the unseen boy. Readers described it not as frightening, but humbling. It suggested the universe recorded emotion as faithfully as light, leaving imprints that patience, and perhaps compassion, could reveal. Years passed. Cameras advanced, chemicals changed, and photography became art rather than miracle. Yet occasionally, among collectors, rumors of a certain 1891 plate surfaced, a legend whispered over whiskey and lamplight. Myers died content, convinced they had glimpsed a frontier no equation could define. Harrison lived longer, often alone, still developing photographs long after his eyesight dimmed. He never stopped chasing light. Daniel grew into a thoughtful man, father himself. He displayed one small photograph on his desk. 2 boys in the same frame, one solid, one nearly transparent, both smiling faintly. Visitors sometimes asked who the other child was. Daniel always answered the same way. "Someone who reminded me to listen." He never elaborated, and none pressed further. When Harrison finally passed, his notes were sealed in the archives of a small photographic society. Inside the final envelope lay one message written in fading ink. Truth and wonder are the same pursuit. Decades later, restorers rediscovered the original plate. Digital scanners revealed microscopic detail, fibers in Arthur's clothing, reflections impossible to fake, light bending oddly around his outline. Modern analysts could explain none of it. They ruled out tampering, double exposure, and optical illusion. The impossible remained precisely that, impossible, yet tangible. News outlets revived the story. Experts debated quantum echoes, parallel realities, residual energy. None agreed. Public imagination did the rest. The photograph became symbol, proof that not all mysteries diminish with time. Daniel, elderly by then, gave one final interview. He held the famous image and said softly, "If he was real, then so is hope. If he wasn't, then imagination is powerful enough to make him so." The interviewer described the old man's eyes shining as though reflecting unseen light. Moments later, power in the studio flickered briefly, cameras catching a faint shimmer beside him. Technicians blamed faulty wiring. The recording captured otherwise ordinary static, until the end, where a small voice whispered one word: "Remember." The sound engineers could not isolate its source. No one in the room had spoken, yet everyone agreed they had heard it clearly. When the footage aired, countless viewers paused at the final frame. For a heartbeat, another figure appeared beside Daniel, smiling. Then the image cut to black. Historians dismissed it as compression error, artifact of broadcast. Believers called it a final visitation. Skeptics turned away. But the story endured, persistent as light itself. And somewhere beyond explanation, perhaps in the quiet between seconds, a child's laughter echoed, neither trapped nor lost, merely remembered by the medium that first revealed him. Because every photograph, in its deepest silence, holds one truth: light never forgets.